long time I couldn't handle about Steve Vai was that everything.
Get everybody
was
on here if I
exactly
can.
at the same time every time. So it was like it was no. Like when I would go see Steve Vai and Joe Satriani, it was no longer a musical experience. It was like you were going to
hear the CD live.
Yeah, you were just going to like witness them do these like technical acts. You know, you're going to see Steve do this. You know, whatever.
And you know exactly where it's going to happen.
Right. And you know, so that was kind of the thing. But like,
but we're talking about the idea of composing solos, not on the fly in the context of improvisation. But okay, I have a song. This is my song. I want to record a solo for it. I don't want to, be sick when I hear it every time and I listen to it from there on. So I want to compose a good solo for my song. So where do you begin? How do you start? We were talking about the fact that there are different approaches, and we were talking about the Jimmy Page approach that everybody had read in Guitar Player magazine back in the 70s was, and I quote, I remember this verbatim, it's just like, I go in, I limber up for a few minutes, I record 3 solos,
and I leave.
And I pick the best of the 3.
Yeah. And that's what Gilmore does.
And he said, they asked him about, well, what about Stairway to Heaven? Such a great solo.
That was one take, wasn't it?
That was the second take.
It was the second take, but he did say, look, I admit to working out a few phrases.
Yeah.
But he said, I generally go in and I wing it. Now, that's a great approach if that's what works for you. John Lord, I was telling the guys, it's the same thing. He says, when he goes in to do a keyboard solo, it's the same thing. He said, the more I play, the less interesting it gets.
Right.
And he said, if I don't get it in the first 3 takes, I put it down for the day.
That's very much me too.
Away.
See, for me, one of the great things about Pro Tools is that whatever my first take was, if I sit down and I do something that I like the first time, I get to save it. It doesn't go away. I don't have to overdub it.
Right.
So there have been things that I've used where it's been the first take in Pro Tools and I liked it and I wound up going back.
Clean it up a little bit.
Yeah, but a lot of times for me, what I find now, like in this band that I'm playing in now, Lazarus, since I didn't write the songs, and I'm asked to compose solos over rhythms I didn't write, it's a very different approach for me, because usually when I write a song and it comes to the solo section, I compose a part that's specifically for me to solo over. Yeah. And for me, a big part of that comes from Slash. That influence comes from Slash, because one of the things that I've always appreciated about Slash, good, bad, or indifferent, is that a lot of times in his songs, or most of the time, he writes a separate part for him to solo over.
I used to do that too.
Another part. Good, bad, or indifferent, whether you like the guy or not, that's just one of the things that I think is really cool. So I always try to do that, so that it brings the song to a different place. As far as getting ideas for songs, for me, for solos, it comes in different ways. Nuno Betancourt, like one of the things I got from Nuno Betancourt when I was a kid was, I'll put on the rhythm and I'll sing. Like I'll just,
I think that's a great idea. I do that too. What I do is I record the backing track, and then I'm not usually going to cut the solo the same day.
Right.
I'm tracking rhythm parts, and I will go back later and cut the solo. So what I do is I make a dub of it and I put it on the iPod or I put it on a CD or throw it in my car, and I listen to the song with that solo section for a few days, and I try to hear melodies in my head, and then I try to sing them, and I find basically my head has a lot more melodies in it than my hands do.
Yeah.
So if I can hear this cool melody in my head, I can play it on the guitar. But beyond that, it's for me, that's the first place I try to go, aside from just sitting there and try to play something over.
Right.
I try to engage the brain and anything I might hear in my head in the way of a melody or something like that.
See, for me, I go even one further than that, because a lot of times I don't even, like if I'm working out a tune, I'm going to try to explain this in terms, in words that'll work. Guitar for me is very visual. I don't know if this works for you guys, but before I played guitar, I was an artist. So a lot of like what we do on guitar is visual. They're shapes, right?
Yeah.
So you see shapes on the neck, and like I'll like a lot of times if I'm like riding the subway or I'm doing something where like I can think about the guitar away from the guitar, I'll start to think about things I'm going to do. One example is in this band I'm in now, I'm doing a solo and it's in D. And I needed to come up with a riff to start it off with, and I thought of this riff on the fucking subway the other day. Fuck, what is it now? That.
Now, when you say you thought of the riff, you didn't have the guitar with you.
No, but I know what it hears. But I know what it sounds like away from the guitar.
So you heard the riff in your
I
head,
heard
or
the riff.
you visualized it
Both.
on the neck?
Well, it's both for me because because what happens to me is when I visualize something on the neck, I know what it's going to sound like before I play it.
Okay.
It's that's basically what it is. So like the song Sparkle Drive that we used to do in Ethos.
Yeah, I think so.
That's a song that I actually wrote on the subway.
Yeah.
I came up with this riff, this part. As a way to go from the B minor to the A.
Right.
And I came up with it in my head on the subway, knowing what it would sound like, and I was able to put it together. Now, I've been playing guitar for 25 years, nonstop, so I have that. For guys who are first starting out, and like my students, I tell them to do put on a tape, listen to it a bunch of times, and hum along. The other thing that I used to do as an exercise was I would have just the music going in the background, and I'd have my little Sony cassette player, and I would actually sing stuff into the cassette player, and then try to mimic that. That's a great thing too.
Right.
You know.
I think there's some tried and true methods that are like, classic from where, for example, if you're lost, you don't have a melody immediately coming to mind. One of the things that's a traditional thing to do is you play the vocal melody.
That works. Yeah, that
And
works.
that's a good starting point. The other thing is
You can do a dive bomb too.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but you can
Kick's great.
you can play the vocal melody, play what the singer would sing, and see what comes out of that.
Yeah.
And that's a jumping off point, another jumping off. I mean,
That's how jazz improvisation started.
and
You know.
but even if you have things like the Joe Perry solo in what's the one where it comes right out of I think it's out of Walk This Way, the solo in that. It's like aside from the unison, it's the idea is growing right out of the riff.
Yeah.
So I mean, you can take the riff that you're playing over and start embellishing the riff.
Well, one of the other things that I like to do is like the Clapton thing of like on Sunshine Your Love where he plays Blue Moon as his solo.
Right. Right.
Like a lot of times what I'll do is if I find that I can't come up with a melody, I'll base my solo off a rhythm with different notes.
Absolutely.
This is a thing Paul Gilbert teaches on his second video where he's like, you take any rhythm like that, you put different notes to that rhythm.
Right.
You still know the rhythm, but it's not the same thing anymore.
Right.
You can superimpose that rhythm over anything.
Right.
I used to find myself playing over different stuff,
Right.
Miss You, whatever, just because
Right.
I would think of that somewhere, but maybe I would change the notes and go,
Yeah.
what do I do?
Quote another song. Basically, you're quoting another song in a
Yeah.
melody
Right.
in your solo, and it's like it almost becomes an inside joke or an
Right.
inside. You're clued in because you understood that this guy is quoting somebody else
Right.
in the song, and that's
That
another,
really helps.
That's another technique.
But another thing is this for me. When I was really young and I was I got my first 4-track, I remember sitting and trying to write solos, and we're talking 20 something years ago now, and not being able to come up with anything, and being like, oh, my bends are out of